people think death will never come to them. If you speak to many out there, including myself, you always imagine that I've got 40 years left to live on this earth. The average age of those who die is normally 70, 80. I'm still in my 30s. Or you'll find someone thinking they're still in their 20s or in their teens. And therefore, many of us, however many deaths we witness, hardly think about death. Are we ready for death? If we were to face death in front of us and it was there calling us, would we be ready to leave the world now or no? The one area where the Muslim community lacks knowledge in terms of its meaning, in terms of its philosophy, in terms of its journey, is death. One reason is because of the fact that we're scared to talk about death. Even when a Maulana chooses to talk about death, or an Imam talks about death, people in some cases become miserable straight away. But as the Ahlul Bayt said, when you talk about death, it's not for you to become miserable. Rather, it's for you to reflect.
Not our normal settings for a film shoot, but I remember you done a series on death. How did that come out?
Yeah, I felt the perspective that was normally given on death was very negative, in some cases scary. And I think we live at a time where belief in the unseen is under question. This idea of another realm, another dimension is already under question. And then on top of that, you want to include punishment of grave, you want to include snakes coming and pressure cooker, you know, within the grave, and then burning in hell, and everybody goes to hell except the Muslims, and there is no salvation for other human beings. I felt that the whole perspective about not just death but the afterlife was a perspective that not only didn't necessarily correlate with the Quran and the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, but also was not helpful in this period. You know, I know people who stopped going to mosques because majalis were always about how if you don't miss your prayer, you're going to die and you're going to be punished, and munkar and nakir and dua Abu Hamza Thamali, and the whole image was extremely negative. But then you find people such as the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, who when they're coming towards death, fustu. Warab al-Kaaba as an example, or Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his lines. There's this really positive look like there is in many of their traditions. So I felt that there needed to be a series which really re-examined the narrative concerning death and the afterlife. And I hope that that was achieved. Yeah.
When you were doing your research, was there any part during that period where you were researching where you thought, wow, this is actually scary?
You know what? No. There was no part in the research that I've personally done on death and the hereafter where I looked at and I'm like, that's really scary. Rather, there are parts of maybe wonder. There's parts of some guilt where you're thinking to yourself that how many more chances is God gonna give me, and how many more times does God remind us? When you're looking at the number of verses in the Quran And I think that's where, if you begin with why the Arabs hated the new message of Islam, it was because of the surah that are named after aspects of, or the surah that discuss death and the day of judgment. Haqqa, Waqi'ah, Naba. Amongst other surah in the Quran, they didn't mind if you talked about God. They had a belief in God. Maybe a belief which became idol worship, but they had a belief. And if you talked about prophets of God, they don't mind. They love Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. You know, they would talk regularly about Hajj. But don't talk about death. And where the Quran hits them, and this can be seen in certain verses of the Quran where there's a back and forth. قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة. There's a back and forth that's taking place between the likes of Abu Jahl, Walid ibn al-Mughira, Utbah bin Rabi'a, Umayyah bin Khalaf. People like this there's a clear back and forth that's taking place between them and what the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, is preaching. So I got to say that when I was looking at death, I was more thinking to myself that, you know what, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you reminded me so many times, and yet maybe I haven't necessarily taken on board these reminders. But fear? No. Excitement? Maybe. Is there going to be a chance that I could see Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam? And if death is what's going to lead to that, that's a bridge I'm willing to cross.
You mentioned that it's the unknown realm. Usually you're scared of something that you do not know. You know, if someone told you behind this door could be anything from something that's going to excite you, something that's going to scare you, just you not knowing what's behind that door, you might not be willing to open that door. But once you open that door, or once you're told what's behind that door, and if it's good, exciting, then you're going to be willing to open that door into that unknown that was unknown.
Yeah.
Let's look at the primary source when it comes to death, the Quran. Before we look at, obviously, the Ahlul Bayt, because we have the Hadith al-Thaqalain, the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. When it comes to the Quran, and you mentioned the Quran speaks about death, and there's quite a large proportion of the Quran that speaks about death. What does the Quran tell us about death and barzakh?
Well, where do you begin, really? When you're looking at the Quran, there's a reminder that one day we're all going to go to a grave. I think there's not a human being on this earth who doesn't fear death at one stage of their life or another. I can't say that I feared it in the research that I was doing, but if you were telling me that throughout my life, come on, we've all feared death. We fear the day we're going to die. And I think what the Quran tries to highlight to us is that you're fearing it because you're too attached to certain possessions that you don't know how you're going to separate from them. Family, personal belongings, status. Hence the Quran begins by saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhaakum at-Takathur. Alhaakum, hada ilahik. When you say hada ilahik, that means this person is going to take you away from maybe that which you should be focusing on. Distraction. Alhaakum at-Takathur. Hatta zurtumul maqabir. People were looking at the maqbara, this graveyard, this central place where, of course, in Islamic literature, this central place is meant to be a place which is in the middle of the city, not on the outskirts. Today,
it's in the outskirts.
It's a place which is in the outskirts.
Why is it important to be in the middle?
So on your way to work, you remember death.
Allah.
On your way to work, you have to remember death. You have to remember that today I could end up scamming someone. I can end up destroying someone's life. I could be ending up sacking someone cold. And so when you see the maqbara, and hence you see in early Islam, Jannat al-Mu'alla or Jannat al-Baqi'
is in central.
You go to Mecca, Mu'allat is right in the middle. And Baqi' is right next to Masjid al-Nabawi. If you look here, this is Atraf. This isn't downtown. This isn't next to the haram of Imam Hussein alayhi salam or the haram of Abu al-Fadl.
We're in the outskirts.
We're in the outskirts. Anyone on their way to work might pass this area. Wadi Salam is very down next to maybe the harams. So in early Islamic literature, you'll find that the maqbara was downtown. The Quran is saying to the Arabs who are looking at the maqbara and saying, I've got more graves than you, I have more family members than you. Alhaakum التكاثر حتى زرتم المقابر كلا سوف تعلمون ثم كلا
سوف تعلمون
كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين لترون الجحيم ثم لترونها عين اليقين. These stages are spoken about where the certainty within the human being of the realities and the dimensions of life are all about to appear for them. So at the beginning, the Quran is talking about the grave because that's the thing we associate the most with death. It also says, if you claim to be the people of God, then seek death. You claim that you're a religious person, then you shouldn't be scared of death. You should just see it as another step in your journey. Those ayahs which talk about, الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا. There are certain people who claim أنا متدين, I'm religious, I'm a Muslim, I'm a believer. The moment you mention death, Baba, stop talking about death, can we change the convo? Quran was also saying, test yourself, use death as a mirror. Are you ready to die today? And then these traditions come about which are telling us, pray your prayer as if it's the last prayer. Look at this world as if you're going to go at any second. And we're introduced to Malik al-Maut. And so when you're introduced to someone like Malik al-Maut, you're seeing someone like Malik al-Maut as a reality who could come to you at any second. If he could come to Sulaiman, while Sulaiman in the Quran is looking at his kingdom. And then Malik al-Maut arrives. And that's it. A man like Sulaiman alayhi salam who has a kingdom which nobody else has. All of a sudden the angel of death. So the Quran, what it does, it either gives you the maqbara or the qabr, or it tells you about prophets and their relationship with the world of death or their enemies. Fir'aun begins to want to be religious when death comes upon. And the Quran is saying, Al-an.
No.
Al-an. It's telling all of us that, look, this idea that I'll become religious if I find out I have a disease or a virus or I'm going to die. No, you don't need to wait till then, because there's no such thing as, for example, as I'm dying, okay, Al-an, for example, Amantu bi Rabbi Musa wa Harun. La, 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 la. Not when you're drowning. We gave you enough opportunities, and the Quran wants us to take advantage of these opportunities. And then the Quran wants to also remind us, whatever atom's way of good you did, we will show it. But also whatever atom's way of bad that you did, we will also, and it introduces you then to the day of judgment. It's telling you how you're going to be raised. It's telling you there's a balance of scales for your actions. It's telling you your intentions are going to be vital on that day. It also introduces you to the fact that don't worry too much. Intercession is going to be allowed for certain personalities on that day. So the Quran really takes you on a journey from looking at the maqbara all the way until literally the divisions of heaven and hell. I think we're not the only ones. Look, Judaism and Christianity also have this journey which medieval Christian scholars would talk about, which different authors in that period would talk about. What is the reality of death? What's purgatory? What happens to the soul? So it's interesting that the Abrahamic faiths all have their own conception, and the Quran is one of them.
During the last 2 years, I'm sure you know of people that have lost their lives. I'm sure during your career as a scholar, you've attended while people maybe are passing away, while they're being buried, while talqeen's done, all these stages. And no doubt they're difficult stages that some may go through. And if I remember correctly, you mentioning that sometimes the purification of the nafs takes place during maybe the squeezing of the grave, during maybe difficult times you go through as your soul's being taken, your experience with these circumstances as a scholar. What are the difficult stages of death from the time you're in that moment when you know these are your final moments and you may have your loved ones around you crying, till the moment you're placed in a grave over here?
Even having loved ones around you is a huge blessing. There was a funeral at my mosque, the Haidar Islamic Center in South London. There was a funeral a few weeks ago. The man who died had no family there. They were even questioning, shall we cremate, or is there something that you guys have to do with the body? But he did mention that he was a Muslim who loved Ahlul Bayt, so we thought we'll come to you guys. You probably know more about it than us. Even having family around you in those final moments, reciting the Holy Quran, is a huge blessing. And I think also for some families, if you do see your parents in pain or your family members in pain, don't take it too badly. Rather be going through some sort of, as you mentioned, purification process now than what the Quran describes Quranically with hell, for example. So the pangs of death are what I ask God, I think, all the time, for him to allow me at that period that's known as Sakratul Maut or the Sakarat. I ask God in that period where we are literally intoxicated, you don't know what's happening. I ask God to make sure that my faith is firm. The Quran and the traditions talk about that period being a difficult period. You could actually lose one's faith at that period, or you could be blessed to see a personality like the Prophet, peace be upon his family, come take you. And I think then after that, Islam is very particular about making sure that just because a body has now, died, it doesn't mean that you don't treat it with respect. The mosques around the Muslim world do amazing work in the way they wash bodies. And then after the washing of the body, the funeral prayer, which, as you said, in the last couple of years, there's been an increase in number. And I look at these people, I'm thinking, a week ago I was having a conversation with them. A year ago I was reciting a majlis at their house. And now I'm leading the funeral prayer for them. And then taking, that, or leading that janazah, leading that prayer, and taking the body towards the graveyard. Everything is done very delicately. There's a recognition that just because the soul is now at the helm doesn't mean the soul itself is going through an easy transition. Not only should one focus on being delicate with the body, but they should also recognize that, around that soul, even limiting one's gossip, even limiting one's talk, that person is in a state of shock. The soul is in a state of shock. And then from there, the reciting of certain Quranic verses such as Surah Al-Mulk, people recite Surah Yasin, and certain recommended acts, you see the Talqeen, for example, being recited. All of these show that Islam wanted that transition to be as smooth as possible.
What do you think, from your reading, your research, benefits one during that period? In life, if you were to see someone and tell them, you follow these 3 steps, and say, we're not talking about salah, we're not talking about hajj, the obligations, what benefits one, other than obviously making sure you do these acts during those stages? What can one hold on to?
I think what we could do for them is pay sadaqah. I think that's the biggest thing you could do for someone who has died. Sadaqah has a huge effect and benefit to the one who has died. As for us, before we pass away, I think, our prayers and our respect for our parents, I think those two go a long way. You know, I think they come back to help us. Alongside the love of the family, you know, the Prophet and the holy household, you know. These, I would say, without a doubt, have an effect. Then the traditions begin to mention certain things that if they survive you, your bank account of reward continues, like having a righteous child, or the spread of knowledge, or a charity that that keeps on giving, you know, the gift that keeps on giving. These are all things which you'd see in the traditions.
When you look at your own personal life, and you mentioned you've done a whole research, and we spoke about your research on death. I'm sure you think about death a lot. How do you think about death with regards to yourself? Where does your mind go?
That's a great question. Yeah, I do sometimes wonder that, you know, what happens, you know, where are we heading? How long do we remain asleep for? Barzakh sounds like this place where you sleep for a long time. You hope that you've represented yourself well, because I think heaven and hell are when you're placed with people similar to you. People all focus on heaven. You know, they hear about rivers and they hear about gardens, and in hell they hear about, you know, hot boiling water and skin changes. I think the first thing I reflect is what have I become? And that's going to be the type of people I'm going to be with in the hereafter. Then you reflect on the separation from one's family. That's difficult. And you hope that your family, for the longest time, you survive them. They don't survive you, because you don't, you know, you don't want them to be in pain after you've gone. And the third thing I think is, I just hope that, although it can never be done, but you hope you've given God something of a sign of gratefulness in terms of what God gave to us. Yeah.
May Allah prolong the life of your loved ones. Has a death affected you? Do you remember of a death, even maybe many years ago or till recently? Has any death of anyone close to you affected you? And if so, how did the death of anyone affect you?
I think it's a great question, because I think that sometimes in life we all need one trial to really wake us up, to really even understand events like Karbala, you know. But there have been a couple of deaths of either, you know, family or friends, where it was, you know, it hurts. It hurts seeing someone in your community younger than you suddenly die, who you may have spoken to a couple of weeks earlier and who was a good soul but went too young. You know, that breaks one's heart. Or seeing someone who is a friend of yours lose someone they love, and, you know, breaking down because you see them break down. And I do wonder about a day, you know, when you lose your own beloved ones, how will you react? And that's where you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for patience in that period.
It may be easier for someone like you, maybe because you read into the life of the Ahlul Bayt and what they went through. Sitting in a graveyard, just remembering that some of the Imams, like Imam As-Sajjad alayhi salam, had to bury his father. Not only does he have to bury his father, he has to bury his brothers, his uncles, his brother's companions, some of his own companions, and he's not doing it to a body that's in a state to actually be. So for you, maybe it's when you read into those, it gives you patience more than maybe others. And again, that's why the unknown is confusing, but once you know something, it makes it easier. How, again, may Allah bless you, Sayyid, how would you like to be remembered? How, Sayyid Ammar, do you think?
No, I think I've never wanted to make it about Sayyid Ammar. You know what I mean? You mentioned the names that it should be about. And that's why I've always said to myself that if a loved one of mine died, I can see myself crying more for what Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam went through with Imam al-Hussein more than even my loved one. Ultimately, may my mom and my dad be sacrificed for them.
That's what we say in ziyarah.
Yeah, and I think that's something we need to reflect on. If my father and my mother pass away, and I can cry for them more than I can cry for Ahlul Bayt, I have to reassess myself. Or if I can cry for them and then remember that, hold on, mom and dad passed away, but they'll never face what Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam faced. And for that matter, all of Ahlul Bayt having really difficult deaths and having very difficult burials. I don't want it to be about me, in all honesty. I really don't want it to, go in that direction. I'd love it if, for example, people, read the Quran or remember you with a Fatiha or remember you with majalis. That would be something amazing from well-wishers. But I'd always want it to be a case of, you know what, direct that all towards the martyrs of the 10th of Muharram.
Speaking of the martyrs of Muharram, the martyrs of Ashura, the service of Aba Abdullah is something that's in your DNA. It's something that's part of you. We've been here on ziyarah, and I've heard, by being with you, seeing so many people come to you and say, you've changed my life. How much will that service, and we're in Karbala, for Aba Abdullah will benefit you once you're ready to face?
Yeah, I hope that, inshallah, that service has a clean intention. That's the thing I reassess the most. What's my intention behind serving? What's your intention behind serving food in Muharram? What's your intention behind, for example, beating your chest? What's your intention behind going to a majlis? What's your intention behind giving a majlis? I always have to reassess my intention. I really sincerely hope that my intention is not tainted, is not, affected by impure thoughts. And that service to Aba Abdullah is ultimate aim is to get me closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ultimate aim has to be getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's not forget that ultimate aim. I hope that in serving Imam Hussein, I don't compartmentalize my religiosity with, okay, I've served Imam Hussein, that means that I've done enough for the year. No, is this service gaining me closeness to God? Is my akhlaq the akhlaq of the Lord? The akhlaq that the Lord wanted established? There are some who serve Imam Hussein and they stop there. Hence, some servants of Imam Hussein alayhi salam don't pray. They will cause absolute havoc in Muharram. Don't pray. That service, I have to continuously remind myself, the ultimate aim of it, it's a means, not an end. In Karbala, the man buried here wanted us to be like him. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله. This is fundamental. ورسول حتى آتاك
اليقين.
يقين. اليقين here doesn't mean certainty. It means maut, death. I want to make sure, and I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspires me to continue my service for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam as a continuing of a divine journey, not of Iraqi culture or Indo-Pak culture or Khawaja culture or Lebanese culture, no, or Shi'i culture. Rather, it is a form of a journey which is transformative. Insha'Allah, that is where I will continue to head.
Today, I have with me the holy flag from the holy shrine of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam as a gift for you, Sayyid.
Thank you so much.
No one deserves this more.
God bless.
Than
Thank you.
The servant of Imam
Am I
al-Hussein.
getting to keep this, or is this just for the camera?
No, inshallah, it's for you, Sayyid.
God bless.
This is for your service for Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, but I have a final question before I leave you. And that, inshallah, as you mentioned, when we're in that moment when we are maybe told that we will be facing death, we are told maybe the Ahlul Bayt will appear. someone who served Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, I'm sure Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam will be there for them.
Inshallah, ya Rab.
My question is for you, Sayyid. What will be the first thing you say to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam when you see him?
You know, you think about these things, and I don't even know if you'll have the strength to even talk, because I think the first thing, you'll break down. If we break down and we haven't even met Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and we break down just by listening to what happened to him, imagine that you get the chance to meet Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. I suppose maybe the first thing would be thank you. You know, thank you for what you did on the 10th of Muharram. Because if it wasn't for that, as the ziyarah says, we would be still in the depths of Jahiliyyah. Thank you. Yeah.
Sayyid Ammar, thank you for joining us.
God bless. Thank you.
Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, what did he say? O children of noble souls, know that death is a bridge. Allah. Imam al-Hussein said it's a bridge from the difficulties and the troubles of this world to paradise and eternal bliss. Who does not want leaving the prison of this world to the eternal palaces of the hereafter?